Hey, welcome back to another episode of Necessary Roughness right here on the Bite Size Sports Network. As always, I'm your host, John Boyd, joined by my co host, Ben Parker. We're going to talk a little bit about the big game, some of our biggest takeaways, and then despite his attire, we're going to hear from a real live Chiefs fan towards the end of this about where he thinks the team can go from here and what the fallout might be from that game. But before we get into all that, Ben, good to see you, brother. How you been?
Man, I'm doing great. Football season is over, but the off season is here. And as always, the NFL provides us with almost as much to talk about during the off season as it does during the regular season. So we'll be fine, even though, we all like our football.
Yeah, we'll be all right. We'll stay busy enough. We'll stay busy enough. We can, we can watch some film on rainy days and get through them just fine. I think. Yeah. So I haven't spoken with you since the Super Bowl. So I do want to get a lot of your Chiefs specific kind of takes here, but I think the real story coming out of this game is Vic Fangio and the Philly defense and what they were able to do. It was jarring. It was an unbelievable performance. Great game plan. Everybody on the defense played out of their minds all at once. It was about as well as this was a better defensive performance than Tampa Bay's in the Super Bowl, and it felt similar. But it was never 34-0 against Tampa Bay. This was something different. So I want to get into just a few tidbits from that game and just kind of talk about how that all ended up playing out. That was Mahomes' worst EPA per drop back of all time in a game. Which is saying something. Not that he's had a lot of terrible games. He's just played a lot of them. And he's played a lot of good teams. And he's played a lot of playoff football. The Eagles did not blitz once. That was a 0% blitz rate game. I think this was a dream game plan for Vic Fangio. And it's one that all of his disciples have had a really difficult time replicating. Not that a lot of, those folks off of that tree have had this kind of talent, particularly on the defensive line. But you think about, Joe Barry, Ed Donatel, Brandon Staley, all kind of tried to call games this way. And just never really were able to. Staley had those two great edge rushers, and still wasn't really able to get away without sending some heat. And same thing with Ed Donatel towards the end of 22. It was, hey, you need to send some pressure at this point to kind of paper over the other issues within your scheme and within your personnel. And there just weren't enough weaknesses with Philly's personnel. And there were no lapses in judgment by any of those players. Everything was installed perfectly. It was taught really, really well. And all of those players had a lot of autonomy within what is a pretty rigid structure. The defensive line coach for Philly, I think Chris Hunt, something like that, said something in one of his pressers about how much freedom that front four had, within the pass rush plan. They were sending four. Yeah, they were running stunts and games here and there, but those four players up front and Zach Bond with the green dot had a lot of ownership over the way they rushed. And I think that's really valuable. It kind of shows, the confidence the coaching staff has in those guys and the really thorough understanding that they've gained of the way, Vic wants them to play defense. And this was the culmination of all of that on the biggest stage against one of the most threatening quarterbacks of all time. 38% pressure rate, again, with 0 blitzes, 16 pressures. Philly allowed a negative 18 yards after catch over expected. So just essentially they were tackling an open space and creating, negative plays where there should have been easy yards. And I mean, we talked about on our preview show, I thought it was going to be, if Andy Reid was going to, kind of get Philly on its back foot on the defensive side, I thought it was going to be a lot of early, quick touches to Xavier Worthy in the flat, little tunnel screens, bubbles, flats, quick outs to maybe set up something deeper late in the game, and he didn't have a touch in the first half. And maybe
was all that?
Maybe they were just discouraged enough. That one of those early plays, I think it was the first down to Juju on that RPO. They winged that right past Cooper DeJean and really targeted him. And for a second there, I'm like, okay, maybe they're really going to try to stress this rookie, and maybe that's part of the plan here. Maybe they saw something on tape, and then they kind of got away from the RPO game. I don't know if that was, not having the confidence they had in the running game coming in, or where that came from. But again, 6 sacks for Philly in the second quarter. So it's still a contentious game. Philly's out to that quick lead already, but you can still get into halftime with a manageable deficit at that point. It was still a very competitive portion of the game. Right. In the second quarter, on 11 pass plays, Kansas City gained 3 yards. In that quarter, that pressure rate was 54.5%, and which was rough. And Philly didn't play afraid of that running game. They ran 100% light boxes, 6 or fewer. They lived in nickel, and they covered on the back end. It was, that was about as dominant. That was, 2013 Seahawks-esque against Denver. It was 2015 Denver-esque against Carolina. It was 2018 Patriots-esque. Granted, the Patriots only put up 17 of their own, but so it seems a lot more lopsided than it was. But to isolate the defensive performance, it was one of those. This is 2000 Ravens. This is 02 Bucks. This was dominance. And when you consider the quality of opponent, I think it makes it the most impressive of those examples I just gave. This wasn't Kerry Collins. This isn't Trent Dilfer. This is Patrick Mahomes on the biggest stage. So I was super impressed with that. There was another play I kind of wanted to highlight, but what else stood out to you, either from a KC offense or a Philly defense perspective, when those two were matched up?
You take your pick. I can either criticize Kansas City or just heap more praise on the Eagles defense. Which would you and your audience rather hear, man?
Well, I've got a lot of the latter in the chamber here. So how about you criticize KC for us? I'd love to see what you think, because you've watched every game closer than I have, and you have a better concept of how they succeed when they do. So go for it.
Yeah, and listen, this is taking nothing away from the Eagles defense. Even if Kansas City did everything that I'm about to talk about, it may not have changed the outcome, but you had to give yourself a chance, and Kansas City didn't. Where were the Mahomes rollouts? Okay, even if you think maybe your offensive line can hold up, by the second drive you knew they couldn't. Why didn't you adjust? Where were the Mahomes rollouts? There were very few. Where were the jet sweeps? Run them all season. Where are those at? Okay, where were the running back screens, the tunnel screens, the wide receiver screens? You've already mentioned that. Where were the inside runs, just to kind of mix it up and change it up a little bit? Not much of that. Where were the big boxes where you have two tight ends and a running back and try to run off tackle and at least suck that defense in so they're not sitting back there in 7 in coverage? Where was that at? None of that. Where was the RPOs? You already mentioned that. Where were the mesh routes over the middle? Kansas City doesn't do a lot of mesh, but you could have done something and you didn't. Where were the Mahomes rollouts combined where you could target, because the Rams did this, where you could target deep. You roll Mahomes out and target deep by actually forcing the Eagles' safeties and corners into man coverage deep downfield. None of that. Where were the tight end combo high-low routes, man? We've seen Kansas City all year run Kelsey short because he can't do the deep as much anymore. Kelsey short, he basically and then you have the other tight end run a deep seam route, and it opens up something because the defense can't really cover both. I mean, where was all that? I mean, they decided – because, again, I get it. Maybe the first or second drive, you want to test and see if your offensive line can hold up. I get that. By second drive, you knew they couldn't. You knew they had no chance. So where was all the rest of this stuff that they've done all year and really for the past 2 years? You mentioned the quick outs to Xavier Worthy, all of it. There was nothing. They just decided we're going to keep dropping Mahomes back in deep drops and just keep letting him get smothered. And, you know, we saw the result. 2 turnovers, 3 turnovers. It was insane. The numbers are insane, man. And hats off to the Eagles defense. But I would have liked to see this Kansas City offense do some things to maybe force Philly to change up a little bit and give yourself a chance. They never did that. I don't know why.
Yeah, that's all great stuff, and I mentioned on our preview show on Thursday as well. You know, when Trevor posited the question, you know, hey, how does this Kansas City offense win this matchup?
Right.
And I mentioned the Xavier Worthy stuff. You know, he in quick out routes, flats, and tunnel screens. He was in the 95th percentile or better in EPA on those routes. And I thought that would really kind of be the crux of their game plan, just because that felt like a way you could maybe get Philly off their foot. You could maybe kind of set up a double move or two to get Worthy deep if those kind of things were effective. But I also said, I mentioned the, 100% light box rate that Philly deployed. They were not afraid of this run game.
No.
And I feel like you're right. Last season on KC's run, one of the biggest things that they started to do, and frankly, their personnel at wide receiver isn't that much better this season than it was last year. They started to go to 12, 13 personnel all the time, getting all those tight ends involved. And just kind of mucking up the box. If you're able to at least, run it up the middle, run it right off of Creed Humphrey and Trey Smith, run a little bit of duo and try to displace these guys. At least you might be able to force them out of what they're so comfortable doing, which is nickel quarters, cover 7 behind a 4-man rush, 6-man box. You're at least able to, whether they're still in nickel personnel, if you can force them out of nickel personnel, then you can start taking some shots. But even if you can force a creeper into the box to make them respect the run game, I know it got out of hand quick, but I would have loved to have seen them stay a little bit more committed to the run and, just try and have some sustained drives, to kind of put some water on the fire a little bit. And slow things down. But, Philly executed so well. And I think there were some things they could have picked at if KC called the game a little bit differently, if Andy and Nagy had, maybe the ability to check out of certain things, or, once you're into a game, you're in it, but you have that extra long halftime in the Super Bowl. Players always complain about, you've got 8 minutes in a PB&J in the regular season, and then all of a sudden in the Super Bowl, you're sitting there, tightening up for 45 minutes or whatever it is. At that point, when it's DEFCON 1, you do have some time to kind of adjust that game plan a little bit more and a little bit more to communicate that to everybody. I haven't watched back every snap. I haven't watched a lot of the second half because when I went back to the All-22, I really focused on that first half when it was most contentious. But I am curious to see if I'm able to notice anything they tried to do differently in the second half. Obviously, they had a little bit of success getting some points on the board, but I wonder if that's more a product of the game script at that point than it is KC adjustments. But there was one play, the Cooper DeJean pick six was a really interesting play to me. And there are more. If you want, just some more breakdowns of plays and the way Philly executed, there's a really great follow on Twitter named Sean Syed. Sean Syed is his last name. He's a Fangio-sexual, I would call him. Big time Vic Fangio guy. Loves the way he does it. Was able to interview him on Radio Row, if I'm not mistaken. And anyway, he posted a ton of clips that are really, really, really interesting to check out. But the one I wanted to kind of highlight, I watched this so many times because it was beautifully complex in its simplicity from a Philly perspective. And this was the Cooper DeJean pick six. PC goes with a tight bunch to the right side. And then you've got your back offset. And I think it was Hopkins. It might have been Brown isolated to the left side. And we talked about the, structurally the way you want to defend a bunch, whether it's a 3-by-1 or a 4-by-1, when you've got your eligibles overloaded to one side. And out of quarters, that is kind of the way to do it, which is kind of forming a box coverage. There's a ton of different checks out of it. There's a ton of different ways to run it, but you want to get 4 bodies over your 3-man bunch. And generally that is just kind of a square, 2 high defenders, 2 low defenders. When you're in quarters, that's a safety in a corner, and then you've got your nickel and your linebacker over top there. And I think it was Kelsey on the inside of the bunch. He actually chips. They run a flood to the bunch side with a big deep over coming from that back side of the play. And then the running back actually leaked out to the flat to be that low man in the flood concept when Kelsey chipped. So they protected with 6, obviously scared of that pass rush. Now you've got 7-on-4 in coverage because you can't block up 4 with 5. So they chip Kelsey. They're able to block it up decently well. Mahomes ends up having to maneuver a little bit. But what was really interesting is you've got 3 levels of deep outs with the flat, kind of a middle, and a deeper out, those 2 out of the bunch. And then you've got your big deep over coming across the field. And Cooper DeJean was the nickel there. And if I understand it correctly, if Kelsey would have been that man to the flat, I think it would have been Cooper DeJean would take him to the flat. That nickel should be your quarter flat defender when you're in quarters, right? But since it was that running back leaking out late, Zach Bond actually took that assignment to the flat from the box. And so suddenly Cooper DeJean is kind of roaming. And so instead of just getting to his landmark, he kind of keeps those like it was very like Ty Law, like, right. I know my assignment by the book, but the way it played out, I'm not there. I'm just going to find the ball. And he gained a lot more depth than he would generally in that call.
Right.
And Mahomes probably made the right throw. He just didn't just get to Cooper kind of creeping back into the passing window, slowly gaining depth, keeping zone eyes, and picking that ball off. And he also, he ran, GPS tracked him at like 21.3 miles an hour on the pick six, which was the fastest for any defender with the ball all season. How about a white corner pick six with the fastest GPS tracking time in the Super Bowl? And throughout the rest of the game, Coop did a great job on Kelsey. He was really physical with him when he drew that matchup. Reek and Chip did a great job on him.
Right.
It's one of the better performances I've seen. And the funny part about it is it wasn't a Jalen Carter domination. It wasn't all pro Zach Bond dominating. This was Josh Sweat, 2.5 sacks, 17.9% pressure rate. Milton Williams, 4 pressures and 2 sacks on just 21 pass rush snaps, good for a 19% pressure rate. It was Jalix Hunt had that half sack. Nolan Smith was kicking ass as a run defender, as an edge setter. There's a play I'm sure you could find if you looked it up on Twitter, guys. I'm sure somebody's clipped it, but there's a play early in the game. It was a Moro Ojomo, something like that. I actually got the tackle for loss, but they ran counter to the offensive left side. Nolan Smith setting the edge. So that means Trey Smith, slated to get $100 million in free agency, mammoth of a man, pulling to set that edge for the counter, and Nolan Smith knocked him back like Nolan Smith was 350 pounds. It was the whole like head back, knocked Trey Smith off his rocker. Just unbelievable play from like every single Philly defender. It was unbelievable. The whole 7-man rotation on the front 4. Brandon Graham was in there for 5 pass rush snaps, got a pressure, made some impact. Crazy he was able to come back in time for the Super Bowl. And he's going to get one on the way out. But I think just kind of that conversation, talking about the depth of the Philly defense and everything like that, is a perfect segue into the next segment I had planned here, and that's the organizational excellence of these two teams really in the Mahomes era. I don't think there's another team that, other than KC, since Mahomes took over, I don't think there's another team you can point to that you could say has had a better run organization over that time frame than Philly. Obviously, they've been to 3 Super Bowls within that time. They've had a couple of down years. There's been an insane amount of turnover with the coordinators. This also isn't the same coach who won it in 2017, head coach. The mainstay of the organization is, well, I guess there's technically 3 that go back to 17: Brandon Graham, Lane Johnson, and Howie Roseman, and Jeff Stoutland, which shouldn't go unmentioned as the offensive line coach. But the way that Howie Roseman and all his cohorts in the front office have like continued to replenish these positions they really value, which is largely the offense and defensive lines, is astounding. Right. And it's not just about investing for the sake of investing. I mean, they have taken 8 of their last 12 top 100 picks have been either offensive or defensive linemen. They've taken a defensive lineman. They've taken 4 defensive linemen in the last 4 drafts. 3 out of the last 4 drafts, they've selected one in the top 3 rounds. And these are guys like Nolan Smith, Milton Williams, Jalen Carter, Josh Sweat, Jordan Davis, and Moro Ojomo. Not bad for a day 3 pick. And what's hilarious about it is the only big money outside of the building free agent you went and got has been a healthy scratch most of the season in Bryce Huff. Got pretty premium edge money, and then he got there, and they weren't afraid to say, hey, we like these guys on rookie contracts better.
Yeah.
And that's the luxury they afforded themselves, was just, we've got some money to spend. We're going to spend it on the position we value. But hey, if we outdraft our free agency signings, hell with it. We'll just play those guys. And you've got so many amazing players in the building. you're just going to kind of see how it shakes out. And I think KC's been very similar, although, you know, they've had the luxury of sort of building around some Hall of Famers. You know, it's been less kind of a sum of the parts than it has been really, really premium talent at certain positions and that kind of raising your floor. But I think, you know, very similar to KC, the way that they've attacked the offensive line since that Bucs Super Bowl. And they had a really good line leading up to that when they still had Fisher and Schwartz at tackle. So, you know, they've pivoted well from that. And Philly's pivoted well from, you know, multiple Hall of Famers on the line too, from Jason Kelce and Brandon Brooks and Lane Johnson to suddenly you've got Cam Jurgens just slowly taking over for Jason Kelce. You probably had Landon Dickerson slated to take over for Jason Kelce until the next draft came. And you're like, we like this guy too. We'll just start the 340-pound guy at guard. And, you know, they flanked Jason Kelce, undersized center, with a guy like Brandon Brooks, 335 at right guard, and a left guard whose name's escaping me right now was a big mauler as well. And then you bring Jurgens in, similarly undersized. So, hey, fuck it. Let's get a 375-pound right guard. And then we'll stick Landon Dickerson at left guard, who's 340. And we're going to have a left tackle who is, you know, a 380-pound rugby player. And he's just going to kick ass. And then the guy who's not, you know, who doesn't have this ungodly, unusual size is just going to be one of the best technical blockers of all time in Lane Johnson.
Yeah.
It's almost funny. How about Zach Ertz had 11 catches on you in the NFC Championship, and you're not even too worried about it because you had Dallas Goedert as his understudy for a few seasons and just moved on when you felt comfortable. So I don't know. I'll kick it to you to speak a little bit more to the way KC's kind of handled Mahomes' tenure and the way they've built the roster around him. And then we'll kind of pivot to, you know, whether or not you think that continue.
Yeah, for Kansas City, and hats off to the Eagles. Howie Roseman's brilliant. He's amazing. But when you talk about the Chiefs real quick, you know, they would rather be able to throw the football deep all the time, okay? Just like they did when they had Tyreek Hill. But Hill's absence is not the reason they can't throw deep. It's those tackles that you mentioned. As soon as Mitchell Schwartz and Eric Fisher left, they've been unable they have tried so hard. They have been unable through the draft and through free agency to get anybody to even kind of hold up as far as stopping edge rushers and pass protection. They can't do it. That's why they have 2 tight end sets and 3 tight end sets and fullbacks. That's why Mahomes gets rid of the ball quicker than anybody in football. That's why they run so many darn RPOs and jet sweeps and tunnel screens and you name it. They can't block off the edge. They haven't ever since Mitchell Schwartz and Eric Fisher got injured and had to let them go. When they had those 2 tackles, the numbers game switched. All of a sudden, they could flood 5 receivers downfield against basically 6 defensive backs because defenses felt like they had to bring an extra guy to pressure, right? So it's 6 on 5. Here in the Super Bowl,
Or they had to spy.
Yes. Here in the Super Bowl, you're looking at Kansas City putting out 4 receivers against 7 defenders and 7 good ones and smart ones too. It's a complete different numbers game when that starts to happen. And, oh, by the way, you can't even stop the front 4. So Kansas City, their number one need has been tackle for 3 seasons now. But I don't know how they're going to fix it, all right? They have tried. They have tried to draft guys. They have tried to bring in free agents. They have been completely unable to do it. They'll keep trying. That is the number one need. They could also look right across the screen at the Eagles. And Kansas City doesn't need help roster building. But if you were going to pick on one thing, the Eagles usually have very fast edges, not big ones. And Kansas City, although they've brought in tons of guys at edge, they don't usually bring in fast ones. They've kind of aimed for athletic guys and projects and well-rounded guys. And Karlaftis has been okay over there because he's kind of a polished guy. They haven't brought in fast guys on the edge. that's something else that they could do as well. Maybe just concentrate on bringing in a fast guy on the edge to go along with Spagnuolo's scheme. So anyway, two tremendous teams. It's really hard to get better when you're that good. It's really hard to improve the roster, but there's always ways to keep working on.
Yeah, I mean, and imagine if Howie Roseman didn't make the one mistake of his career and had taken Justin Jefferson over Jalen Reagor. What would that look like now?
Forget about it.
Yeah, that's what's funny is they can forget about something like that now. Vikings fans are still holding on to it as a moral victory. We still the clip from the Zoom draft room when Philly took Reagor over Justin Jefferson is still something you'll see circulating on Vikings Twitter. You see Rick Spielman and Mike Zimmer just laughing. They're like, what the fuck are they doing, dude? Yeah, send it in. Justin Jefferson. Yeah, immediately. But, that's we can hang the banner for that, I guess. So, and yeah, the funny thing about Philly, too, is like if I had told you the Eagles would have a 22% rushing success rate and be up by 34 points at one point, you'd give me a lobotomy. But that's what happened. That's how well-rounded of a team this was. And, I think they're as well set up for the future as any organization as well. For the future of the formerly two-time reigning Super Bowl champion Kansas City Chiefs, what do you see kind of the next chapter of this team being under Patrick Mahomes? He's 29. Andy Reid is older. Travis Kelce is older. Chris Jones is older. Do you think that it makes it less likely for Kelce and Reid to move on now that they do have that sour taste in their mouth? Like, do you think there was a chance they may have ridden off into the sunset on a three-peat? And do you think that sort of situation changes at all given the loss with, like the older guys on the roster, older keys?
It's a great question, and I don't have a great feel for it. I kind of sort of feel like Kelce may just be done, even though they didn't get the three-peat. I mean, he's got things that he can go do in the media. He's got Taylor Swift, obviously, whether or not that's a long-term thing, we'll see. But he's got, and listen, everybody saw him getting a little older this year, a little slower. It's I'm sure even he don't want to talk about it, but I'm sure he knows. So he's got to ask himself, next year, do I lose another step? Do all my numbers drop again? Do I want to do this again? I wouldn't be surprised if Kelce's gone. And I would be very surprised if Andy Reid, whether he got the three-peat or not, I would be surprised if he's gone because this is what he loves, man. I don't think he really – because, Andy Reid enjoys doing the commercials and stuff, right? But Andy Reid doesn't really know what else to do other than clock in and work on this football team, So I figure Andy Reid does this as long as he healthily physically can.
Yeah, I'm with you there. And I think we even saw Kelce lose a little bit like as a blocker. There were times in this game when it seemed like he wasn't getting the punch he tends to, or maybe was a little bit out of position. You spoke to how fast those Philly edges are, which might have played a role for sure. But I wouldn't be shocked at a Kelce retirement. I just got to wonder if at this point, if he just wants to go out on top by any means necessary, with Mahomes still in place and Andy still in place, and kind of all these guys he's gone to war with for so many Super Bowls are still there. I could see him staying for sure too. But that being said, there are a couple of key free agents. After this kind of showing in the Super Bowl, what's your temperature on retaining Trey Smith? Do you think they might kind of forego that big contract and try to circumvent those resources to rounding out the tackles, and maybe they feel a little bit more comfortable living with a weak spot on the interior than they do on the outside? What's your feel on a Trey Smith extension at this point?
I love that question. Okay, I could geek out on this for hours, literally, but I'll keep it to like 2 minutes. Okay.
Perfect.
If it were me, and I do like Trey Smith, and they like Trey Smith, and everybody likes Trey Smith, I would not resign him. I feel like you saw as soon as Tooney moved over to tackle this year, as soon as that happened, you not only saw Caliendo struggle and Tooney not be as good at tackle as he was at guard, which we all knew he couldn't be. Creed Humphrey's performance stayed the same, but Trey Smith's performance dropped. And that's because of the musical chairs you're playing. Usually, Tooney is helping out tackle, and Humphrey is helping out right guard, which is Trey Smith. But as soon as you make that change, right, Tooney's over at tackle. Now, Tooney himself needs help from tight ends and fullbacks, and Humphrey now has to turn over and help Caliendo more often than not. It kind of leaves Trey Smith by himself, and you saw that even though he's good, he still kind of needs the help from somebody else who's even better. And so if it were me, especially when I look at this year's draft, there are guys you can pull in. There are tackles you can turn into guards in this year's draft, and there are also just straight up good guards that you can plug in here that Kansas City could get there with their late first-round draft pick. So if it were me, I'd take that cap money, even though I'm not trying to slam Trey Smith here. I'd let him walk out the door, and it's not unusual. Kansas City every year lets go of at least one major guy just because of cap reasons every year. So don't be surprised if they let go of Trey Smith. They may try to keep him, but ultimately they're going to want to pay Creed. They're going to want to keep Creed Humphrey. So, you can't pay everybody. And they decided to pay Chris Jones a bunch of money last offseason, and the Mahomes contract isn't going anywhere. So somebody eventually just isn't going to get paid.
Yeah. This comment from Lee makes a lot of sense to me as well. So to that point then, because I think I'm kind of with you with that sentiment. Like it's tough to say, hey, let's run it back and let's, really pay that crazy market value to Trey Smith when, I think you realize there are a couple other pretty significant holes, even just outside of tackle. So on the defensive side, again, everything's going to orbit around Chris Jones and Trent McDuffie to a lesser extent. He's a guy you can kind of set and forget on most receivers not named A.J. Brown. He had some good reps against A.J. Brown. He just doesn't have the size necessarily to do that all day. As an outside corner, played about 80% boundary this season. If they're coming out as more of a nickel type, not that is as stringent as it used to be, but between kind of, and I think the linebacker group's really solid between Chanel, Bolton, Tranquil. I think you're good there at least for another season. And if I'm not mistaken, all three of those guys are under contract still as well. So would you boost? Let's say you had to pick one, and maybe they're able to figure out both as well. But Jalen Watson was rough most of the day, and I don't think it's a glaring need. I think he's a average starter at this point. But definitely something you could upgrade there. And Shamari Connor played well in the slot for the most part. And that's what the Chiefs do. They'll find late round guys and plug them in and they'll be fine. But would you prioritize another corner, whether it's a boundary guy opposite Trent, or maybe more of like one of those safety nickel types that can be really flexible within that secondary, or one of those speedier turn the corner kind of edge rushers to where your best bet isn't 300-pound Chris Jones at the 7 technique? Which would you prioritize most coming into this offseason for KC?
That's really a tough question. That really is not easy because you mentioned fast edge Or do I go after kind of a hybrid safety who's tough, or do I go with not a shutdown corner? There aren't very many of those anymore with today's offenses being what they are and the rules being what they are, but a really good cover corner over here, kind of similar to what McDuffie can do, maybe just an inch taller, right? So that is really tough.
Yeah.
Ultimately, if I could grab the corner, I would do it, all right? Because I fully believe this is not a bad secondary. It's a decent secondary. But when Spagnuolo's guys don't get home to the quarterback, when they don't get pressure, they can be exposed downfield. They're not great cover guys. They're just not. McDuffie is, but the other guys are not. They're just not great cover guys, and they can be exposed down there. So as long as I've got Chris Jones creating good pressure up the middle and the quarterback, I would love to add another cover guy back there, a legit cover guy. Spagnuolo tends to get guys who are more physical and going to kind of bump and run for about 2.5 seconds until his guys can get there, right? But when they don't get there, you can see it in this Super Bowl too, but you can see it at different times. When they don't get there, you don't really have true, legit cover guys. You have decent guys who just can't carry it downfield very far. So ultimately, it depends on what's available. If I had to prioritize one, it would be a legit cover guy out there, cornerback for me.
I think that's the way I'd lean too. And like you said, you've kind of got to toe the line there, because I don't think Spagnuolo wants to lose that identity in the secondary, which is,
right.
Hey,
right.
let's get funky up front. Let's force the ball out relatively quickly, because everybody in that secondary is a maniac. I mean, those guys tackle really well. They fly to the ball. Justin Reed's a psycho. Connor loves to mix it up. Trent McDuffie, psycho. So I think you do have to be a little picky with the types of guys you bring in there, but
right.
I think that would move the needle the most, for sure. And that might be, a splash like a DJ Reed. If you don't go and re-sign Trey Smith, maybe that's something like that. Maybe it's a little bit more along the margins, but I do feel like it might be easier to find productive edge rushers. Maybe it's even pass rushing D tackle in free agency, just because there's more for like the pass rush specialist types, your sub package guys.
Yes.
Because I think you feel pretty good about Karlaftis and base, and you might have one of Tershawn Wharton, or Derek Wharton's a free agent, but you might have one of him or Noddy and back there with Chris Jones, and feel okay in base. But I think you're right there. Yeah. Okay. Well, those were all the pre-planned questions I had for you regarding KC. Do you have any other kind of parting thoughts on this season, this sort of era, and anything else that is kind of itching you as you kind of look towards the off season here as well?
Yeah, and I got to say, you mentioned Lee. Thank you, Lee, for watching. We really appreciate it as always. Thank you for everything. I know we didn't. He even tossed in here, Ben, can we afford Myles Garrett, or is their cap short? Yeah, so the Chiefs are not going to be able to afford Myles Garrett. They could and would trade for him, and I would encourage that from a draft pick standpoint, but they're just not going to be able to swing it from a cap space standpoint. It would really make a huge wrecking ball mess of their cap space, so they just can't do it from that standpoint. I would love to see the Bills pick up Myles Garrett. I really would. Good, solid roster over there. They just need a big difference maker, and Myles Garrett would be it. So, Lee, thank you for watching. I did want to end up with praising the Eagles again, just real quick. Fangio is amazing. Howie Roseman is amazing. Kellen Moore did good. I don't think he's amazing, but he did a good job this year of being flexible, making things work. I thought he did a good job this year. Nick Sirianni, I don't know exactly what Nick Sirianni does, to be honest, but he figured out a way with the talent he was given and the coordinators he picked this year. Yeah, he figured out a way to win a Super Bowl. So hats off to you, Nick. I mean, I don't know how likable you are. I don't know how football brilliant you are, but you did it. So hats off to Nick. And then those players, man, good gosh, you've already said it. All over the field, goodness gracious. They were tremendous. And while a small segment of Philly fans are obnoxious and we all hate them, most Philly fans are pretty cool people, and I'm happy that your team got a Super Bowl here. So that's kind of my final note here as we close out the show.
Yeah, I mean, congrats, Anne Hathaway. Congrats,
Kevin Bacon.
Kevin Hart. I'm happy for you. Kevin Bacon, yeah, exactly. Congrats, Rob McElhaney from Always Sunny in Philadelphia. We're all happy for you. And I think it's really interesting kind of like reflection point for a team that's been so dynastic since Mahomes took over. This, as much as I wouldn't have I wouldn't have been a curmudgeon about a three-peat. That would have been cool to see, and I like to think I would have been able to kind of remove myself from the moment and say, man, this is going to be cool to tell my kids about, right?
Right.
But I think this makes for a much more interesting, next couple of months and next couple of years for Kansas City with Patrick Mahomes kind of having that 07 Brady knockdown, right? Like, it wasn't the same thing, of course. They lost one meaningful game, so it wasn't 0 games. But it was also an instance where one of the greatest quarterbacks of all time is chasing history and falls short in the big game, in a game in which he was favored. They weren't favored heavily, and maybe they shouldn't have been favored at all. But, it's a similar thing, and to have that reflection point, it makes it really interesting to see what they do from here and how they handle the next couple of seasons and this offseason in particular. So I'm happy with that. I would have loved a closer game, but I think the dismantling that Philly handed them makes for a really compelling, pivot point for the team in general, which is really interesting as an impartial fan. So also, and frankly, while we're on the topic, I wouldn't be shocked if Myles Garrett ends up in Philly. There would be a lot more shocking places that I could see him go.
Oh,
just because it's a complete monopoly money cap sheet for those guys. They are just pass and go, not a jail free. They're I don't know. They're buying property on Bontanora Avenue or whatever the hell it is. It's a fake thing. They all these machinations of the contracts for them are all like pre-restructured. Like, everybody's base salary is just $1 million. The vet minimum is the base, and everything else is just really malleable amounts of money. And they've got void years going. I wouldn't be shocked. I haven't studied their cap sheet at all, but there are things that would shock me much more than Myles Garrett ended up in Philly. I might prefer that to him going to like Detroit personally, but I think there's a lot of interesting spots for him. It's a goofy situation. Like, it's really tough for Cleveland to stomach the amount of money they'd take on by trading him, or they would maintain by trading him. Where he is in his contract, and maybe when they get to the negotiating table, if he kind of lays out the teams he wants to go to, maybe some of those teams would be willing to shoulder some of the guarantees that Cleveland's on the hook for. We've seen things like that take place all over the place. So, that's kind of the only other big news. But with that, folks, thanks for tuning in to this Super Bowl recap. This is where the fun begins. So this was a more concise kind of show, but Ben and I and some other sicko buddies of ours are really stoked to get into some off-season content and start to bring you guys some really interesting projection kind of stuff. We're going to have a lot of draft content on the show moving forward. We're going to have these off-season plans for teams that we've been talking about. Like I said, I think we are going to start with the Boss Colts, which should be a fun one. I'm going to work on scheduling that out with him and finish out putting together some templates for the series, and those might come to you guys pre-recorded. So keep notifications on, kind of keep tabs on the channel. They might not be live streams like this every time, just for the sake of maybe it's easier for us to all connect at a different time. That's not a great viewing time for you guys, but one way or the other, we will have some really fun stuff coming to you. And at least for us, it's going to be just as, if not more fun than talking about real life football games. I think we really like to, kind of put together some what ifs and diagnose the, everybody's salary cap situation, everybody's the roster building. This is the time of year for the roster building, sickos. So if you're into that stuff, stick around and keep on the lookout for all that stuff. In the meantime, I know Ben's doing a ton of other shows on YouTube. Ben, let them know where else to find you and what you've been working on.
Yeah, oddly enough, a couple of things we just mentioned tonight. At 8 o'clock tonight, it's already been released over on YouTube. Me and Austin Freed and Shane Ratliff, we covered the NFL defensive front 7 free agents that would be available. So kind of the top 12, 15 slice there. You can catch that on Sports and Money KC on YouTube. But we also talked about the Minnesota Vikings defense, kind of what we saw this season, and then their kind of current 12 to 13 players that we liked and didn't like over on the defensive side. And next week we will do a really short Vikings kind of 3-round mock draft, which will really be 2 draft picks because that's what they got in the first 3 rounds. So that's it. Sports and Money KC. Thank y'all. Enjoyed it. Pay the refs more. Yes, we didn't pay them enough.
That's the problem. Not enough. Not enough. The Sharks got you. Don't forget to trade down from 24 unless Kenneth Grant or Tyler Booker are there. We need some picks. We need some running back. We need a lot. But I will definitely have to check that out. I got to catch up on the draft with you guys. I haven't been able to really zero in on it, but I'm going to have to start writing about them here pretty soon over on zonecoverage.com. So I will definitely be tapping into what you and the guys are doing over on that channel and tapping you and Simon for some guys I should be looking out for. So look out for that as well over on Zone Coverage, where all of my written work is in the Vikings. I've got a couple pieces up now for potential Vikings free agent targets. I've done one on DJ Reed and one on Milton Williams that published the Friday preceding his 2-sack, 4-pressure Super Bowl performance. So the price of the brick is going up exponentially, but hey, I think, more of a pass rush specialist, not the best run defense chops, but I'd be surprised if he got less than Javon Hargrave did on the open market. So check that out over there, and then you will find all kinds of stuff that I just told you about right here on Bite Size Sports coming up over the offseason. So stick with us. Go Vikings. Go JJ McCarthy. And we'll see you next time.